In the quiet suburb of Ridgefield, Connecticut, the Caldwell residence had always been known for its well-manicured lawn, tasteful holiday decorations, and the picture-perfect couple who lived inside. Nathan and Melissa Caldwell were, by all accounts, the embodiment of the American dream: successful careers, a beautiful home, and what appeared to be a loving marriage spanning over 2 decades. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But on the night of March 17th, 2019, the pristine facade of the Caldwell home was shattered when neighbors reported hearing multiple gunshots echoing through the normally peaceful neighborhood. When police arrived, they discovered a scene so gruesome and twisted that it would shock even the most seasoned detectives. Nathan Caldwell, 48, sat calmly in his living room, splattered with blood, a 9mm handgun placed neatly on the coffee table in front of him. In the master bedroom lay the body of his wife, Melissa, 46, with multiple gunshot wounds to her chest and head. But it wasn't just the brutality of the crime that would captivate national headlines for months to come. It was the revelation that these 2 individuals, husband and wife for 25 years, were biological siblings, separated as infants during a chaotic hospital evacuation, their true identities erased by a series of administrative mistakes and deliberate cover-ups that spanned decades. This is the story of how Nathan Caldwell discovered the unthinkable truth about his marriage, the web of lies that had been spun around his life, and how this revelation led to a night of bloody revenge that would forever change the lives of everyone connected to the Caldwell family. Nathan James Caldwell was born on April 8, 1971, at Mercy General Hospital in Burlington, Vermont. At least, that's what his birth certificate claimed. The son of Robert and Eleanor Caldwell, Nathan grew up as an only child in a middle-class home in Brattleboro, Vermont. Robert worked as an insurance salesman, while Eleanor was a part-time librarian who dedicated most of her time to raising Nathan. By all accounts, Nathan's childhood was unremarkable, but happy. He excelled academically and showed particular talent in mathematics and computer science. Former classmates described him as quiet but friendly, smart without being showy about it, and the kind of guy who always had your back. Nothing, in his early years, suggested the darkness that would eventually consume his life. Meanwhile, some 200 miles away in Albany, New York, Melissa Ann Thompson was being raised as the adopted daughter of William and Patricia Thompson. William was a high school history teacher, and Patricia ran a small flower shop in downtown Albany. Unlike Nathan, Melissa knew from an early age that she was adopted. "My parents were always very open with me about being adopted," Melissa would later write in her personal journal, recovered after her death. "They told me they chose me, that I was special. I never felt like I didn't belong with them." The Thompsons had received Melissa through a private adoption arranged by a now-defunct agency called New Beginnings Family Services. The paperwork they were given stated that Melissa had been born on June 15, 1973, at Albany Medical Center to a teenage mother who couldn't care for her. This narrative, which shaped Melissa's entire identity, was the first of many fabrications that would eventually unravel with devastating consequences. Nathan and Melissa's paths would cross in September 1991 at Syracuse University. Nathan was a senior studying computer engineering, while Melissa was a sophomore majoring in business administration. They met at an off-campus party hosted by mutual friends. "It was weird," said Thomas Reeves, Nathan's college roommate and one of the few people who would remain in contact with him until the end. "They just locked eyes across the room, and it was like nobody else existed. I remember joking that it was love at first sight, but there was something else there too, something I couldn't put my finger on at the time." Their romance progressed quickly, Within 3 months, they were inseparable. When Nathan graduated in the spring of 1992, he took a job with a tech firm in Hartford, Connecticut, specifically because it was only a 2-hour drive from Syracuse. The following year, when Melissa graduated early, she immediately moved to Hartford to be with him. They married on October 9, 1994, in a modest ceremony attended by both sets of parents and a small circle of friends. Photos from the wedding show a beaming young couple, Nathan in a charcoal suit and Melissa in a simple white dress, their hands clasped tightly as they faced their future together. They seemed perfect for each other, Patricia Thompson would later tell investigators. They had the same mannerisms sometimes, the same laugh. We used to joke that they were more like siblings than spouses. The irony of that observation would only become apparent years later. The early years of their marriage were, by all accounts, blissful. Nathan's career in software development took off, while Melissa established herself as a marketing executive for a healthcare company. They bought their first home in Ridgefield in 1998, a modest colonial that they would expand and renovate over the years as their financial situation improved. One shadow hung over their otherwise idyllic life. Despite trying for several years, they were unable to conceive children. Medical tests revealed no obvious causes for their infertility. Doctors suggested it might be unexplained infertility, a diagnosis that affects about 30% of couples struggling to conceive. "The baby thing has been hard," Melissa wrote in her journal in 2003. "But maybe it's for the best. Nathan and I have each other, and sometimes I feel like that's all we've ever needed. Like we're two halves of the same person." Again, her words carried an unintended weight that would only become clear much later. By 2010, both Nathan and Melissa had settled into successful careers and a comfortable life. Nathan had risen to become the chief technology officer at a cybersecurity firm, while Melissa was now the vice president of marketing at Hartford Healthcare. They traveled extensively, maintained a wide circle of friends, and were by all outward appearances the embodiment of a successful American couple. But beneath this polished exterior, cracks had begun to form. Friends would later report that Nathan had become increasingly withdrawn, starting around 2012. He began researching his family history, spending hours on genealogy websites, and even hiring a private investigator to look into his background. He never really explained why he was suddenly so interested in his family tree, said Rebecca Lawson, a colleague who had become close to the couple. He just said he had some questions about his heritage that he wanted answered. What Nathan never shared with Rebecca or anyone else was the real catalyst for his sudden interest in his past. It had begun with a routine medical examination. Nathan, at 41, had decided to undergo a comprehensive health screening. Among the many tests conducted was a genetic panel that highlighted several markers for hereditary diseases. The results showed that Nathan had genetic markers consistent with a rare disorder called Anderson-Tawil syndrome, a condition characterized by periodic paralysis, abnormal heart rhythms, and distinctive facial features. Puzzled by this finding, especially since he exhibited none of the physical symptoms, Nathan had questioned his parents about any family history of the disorder. Robert and Eleanor Caldwell seemed genuinely confused and insisted there was no such condition in their family. This discrepancy nagged at Nathan. If he had genetic markers for a hereditary condition that wasn't present in his family, what did that mean? Could there have been a mix-up with his test results, or was there something about his biological heritage that he didn't know? It was this question that led him down the rabbit hole of genealogical research. Initially, he kept his concerns from Melissa, not wanting to worry her with what might be nothing more than a laboratory error. But as his research deepened, he began to uncover inconsistencies in his own birth records. The first red flag came when he requested a copy of his original birth certificate from the Vermont Department of Health. The document he received looked slightly different from the copy his parents had kept in their family records. The hospital name was the same, Mercy General in Burlington, but the attending physician's name differed. When he questioned his mother about this, Eleanor became uncharacteristically evasive. It was probably just a clerical error, she told him. It was a long time ago, Nathan. I don't remember every detail. But Nathan's professional background had trained him to be methodical, to notice patterns and inconsistencies in data. This discrepancy, small as it was, stood out to him like a flashing warning sign. He began to dig deeper. He contacted Mercy General Hospital, only to discover that it had closed in 1997. The records had been transferred to the state archives. After filing several requests, he finally gained access to the birth records from April 1971. What he found, or rather didn't find, shocked him. There was no record of Nathan James Caldwell being born at Mercy General on April 8, 1971. In fact, there was no record of any male Caldwell being born at the hospital during that entire month. Confronted with this evidence, Robert Caldwell finally broke down. In a conversation that Nathan would later describe in detailed notes found in his home office, Robert revealed that he and Eleanor had acquired Nathan through an unofficial adoption. "Your mother and I couldn't have children," Robert explained. According to Nathan's notes, "We tried for years, but it just wasn't happening. We were on waiting lists for adoption, but the process was so slow. Then a friend of mine, a guy I knew from college who'd become a lawyer, told me about this situation. There was this hospital in Vermont that had a fire back in '71, not a big one, but enough to cause an evacuation. In the chaos, some records got mixed up, and there was this baby boy, who somehow got separated from his paperwork. According to Robert, this lawyer friend, whom he refused to name, had helped them expedite the adoption by creating new documentation for Nathan, essentially giving him a new identity. Robert insisted they had been told the baby's biological parents had died in a car accident and that they were doing a good thing by providing a home for an orphan child. "We loved you from the moment we saw you," Robert had said. "We never thought of you as anything but our son. The paperwork, the birth certificate, that was just formalities. You were always meant to be ours." Nathan was devastated. The foundation of his identity had been shaken, but rather than confronting his parents further, he channeled his emotions into more research. If he wasn't Nathan Caldwell by birth, then who was he? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The fire at Mercy General that Robert had mentioned became Nathan's new focus. News archives confirmed that there had indeed been a small fire at the hospital on April 7, 1971, the day before his supposed birth date. The fire had started in an electrical panel and had forced a partial evacuation of the maternity ward. In the confusion, according to one newspaper account, several infants were temporarily misplaced, causing panic among new parents, though hospital administrators assured the public that all babies were quickly reunited with their correct families. Nathan wasn't so sure. The timing was too convenient, the story too neat. He began to wonder if he might have been one of those misplaced infants, and if so, who were his real parents. His breakthrough came in the form of a retired nurse named Margaret Collins. Now in her 80s, Margaret had worked in the maternity ward at Mercy General for over 30 years, including during the time of the fire. Nathan tracked her down to a retirement community in Burlington and arranged a meeting. Margaret's memory of specific babies was understandably hazy after so many years, but she remembered the fire and its aftermath vividly. "It was chaos," she told Nathan, her voice still strong despite her advanced age. "We had to move the babies quickly, and in the rush, some of the identification bands got mixed up. The administration tried to keep it quiet, but there were at least 2 babies who I'm certain went home with the wrong families. When Nathan pressed her for details, Margaret mentioned something that made his blood run cold. One case I remember clearly, she said. There were these twins, a boy and a girl. They'd been born to a young woman. Couldn't have been more than 17 or 18. She died shortly after the birth. Complications from preeclampsia. The father wasn't in the picture. The babies were supposed to go to different adoptive families, already arranged through some agency. But after the fire and evacuation, I always suspected they got switched with other babies. I tried to say something at the time, but the administration was so concerned about lawsuits. They shut me down. Do you remember the names? Nathan had asked, his mouth dry with anticipation. The family name was Brennan, Margaret had replied. The babies didn't have first names yet. They were just baby boy Brennan and baby girl Brennan on the charts. Born April the 6th, 1971, 2 days before Nathan's official birth date. Twins separated at birth. A hospital evacuation that caused confusion with infant identities. The pieces were starting to form a picture that Nathan wasn't sure he wanted to see. His next step was to try to trace the Brennan twins. This proved challenging, as the adoption records had been sealed, and the agency that had handled the adoptions, New Beginnings Family Services, had been shut down in 1989 following allegations of illegal adoption practices. Nathan hired a private investigator, Troy Simmons, a former police detective who specialized in finding lost relatives. Simmons managed to uncover partial records from New Beginnings through contacts in the state foster care system. What he found suggested that baby girl Brennan had been adopted by a couple named Thompson from Albany, New York, the same last name as Melissa's adoptive parents. By this point, it was early 2018. Nathan had been conducting his investigation for nearly 6 years, all while maintaining the appearance of normalcy in his marriage and career. He had never shared his discoveries with Melissa, partly because he wasn't sure what to believe in himself, and partly because he was terrified of what the truth might mean for their relationship. But the coincidence was too great to ignore. Melissa was adopted. Her adoptive parents were named Thompson. She was approximately the same age as Nathan, and now there was evidence suggesting that a baby girl Brennan had been adopted by a couple named Thompson from Albany. Nathan needed to know for sure. Without telling Melissa why, he suggested they both take DNA tests from a popular ancestry service, framing it as a fun way to explore their backgrounds. Melissa, who had always been curious about her biological heritage, agreed enthusiastically. The test results arrived 6 weeks later. Nathan opened them alone, in his office at work, his hands trembling as he logged into the website. The relationship prediction was unequivocal. Nathan and Melissa Caldwell were siblings. Not just siblings, identical twins, sharing 100% of their DNA. The horror of this realization crashed over Nathan like a tidal wave. He and Melissa weren't just related. They were twins who had been separated at birth, who had met by chance at college, who had felt that inexplicable connection that they had mistaken for romantic love, and who had been living as husband and wife for nearly 25 years. Nathan vomited into his wastepaper basket, then sat in his office chair, staring blankly at the wall for hours. His entire life, his marriage, his love, his identity had been built on a grotesque mistake. Every memory of intimacy with Melissa now felt contaminated, twisted into something unnatural and wrong. How could he tell her? How could he shatter her world the way his had been shattered? But how could he not tell her? The truth was written in their very DNA. As the initial shock began to subside, another emotion took its place. Rage. Rage at the hospital that had mixed up the babies. Rage at New Beginnings for their sloppy handling of the adoptions. Rage at his parents for their deception, and, increasingly, rage at a system that had allowed two siblings to unwittingly commit Incest for over 2 decades. It was this rage that would drive Nathan's next actions that would ultimately lead to the bloody scene that greeted police officers on that March night in 2019. But before the violence erupted, Nathan embarked on one final quest for answers, a quest that would reveal an even darker conspiracy behind the separation of the Brennan twins. The discovery that he had been married to his twin sister for 25 years left Nathan Caldwell in a state of psychological freefall. For 2 weeks following his review of the DNA test results, Nathan called in sick to work, barely ate, and spent hours staring at old photos of him and Melissa, seeing with new eyes the similarities he had somehow missed all these years. The identical set of their eyes, the same distinctive arch of their eyebrows, even the matching dimples that appeared when they smiled. According to Nathan's personal journal, recovered from his laptop after his arrest, he contemplated suicide during this period. How do you go on living when your entire life has been a lie? He wrote on February 2nd, 2018, "Every memory is now poisoned. Every moment of happiness was built on something monstrous. I keep thinking about ending it all. But then, who would make them pay for what they've done to us?" That last line, "who would make them pay," would prove prophetic of the dark path Nathan was beginning to travel. Instead of immediately confronting Melissa with the truth, Nathan decided to dig deeper, to understand not just what had happened, but who was responsible. This decision, according to forensic psychologist Dr. Elaine Harper, who later evaluated Nathan, represented a psychological defense mechanism. By focusing on external targets for his rage, he could temporarily avoid dealing with the implications for his marriage. Dr. Harper would testify at Nathan's trial. Nathan began by reaching out again to Troy Simmons, the private investigator he had hired previously. This time, he shared the full truth with Simmons, including the DNA test results. "In all my years of working missing persons and family reunification cases, I'd never encountered anything like this," Simmons later told the Hartford Courier. "The look in Nathan's eyes when he showed me those results, it wasn't just shock or grief. There was something feral there, something dangerous." Despite his misgivings, Simmons agreed to help Nathan investigate the circumstances surrounding the adoption of the Brennan twins. His first move was to track down former employees of New Beginnings Family Services, the agency that had arranged Melissa's adoption. Most had moved on to other careers or were deceased, but Simmons located a former administrative assistant named Judith Prentice, now living in a nursing home in Rochester, New York. Initial interviews with Prentice revealed little. Her memory was clouded by early-stage dementia, and she claimed to remember nothing unusual about adoptions from the early 1970s. The first priority was confirming Nathan's claims about his and Melissa's true relationship. DNA samples were collected from both Nathan and Melissa's body, and the results confirmed what Nathan had discovered. They were indeed identical twins. This created immediate confusion, Detective Rivera explained in his case summary. Identical twins are always the same sex, resulting from the splitting of a single fertilized egg. The concept of male-female identical twins contradicted basic biology. Further genetic analysis revealed the explanation. Nathan and Melissa were what medical science calls semi-identical or sesquizygotic twins, an extremely rare phenomenon where a single egg is fertilized by 2 different sperm cells and then splits. This results in twins who share identical maternal DNA but different paternal DNA. Semi-identical twins had been documented in only a handful of cases worldwide. The Brennan twins, as Nathan and Melissa would come to be known in medical literature, represented one of the rarest genetic phenomena in human reproduction. This confirmation lent credence to Nathan's claims about their relationship, but it did nothing to justify his actions on the night of March 17th. As investigators dug deeper into the case, the full scope of Nathan's meticulous planning became apparent. the scheduled email containing all of Nathan's research into Dr. Maxwell's twin study was sent as programmed on March 18th, creating a media firestorm. Reporters descended on Ridgefield, and the story of the Caldwell tragedy quickly gained national attention. Headlines like "Twins married for 25 years in sick experiment" and "Mad scientist turned siblings into lovers" splashed across newspapers and websites. While the media focused on the sensational aspects of the case, Detective Rivera and his team were uncovering the methodical way Nathan had prepared for his final act. Financial records showed he had transferred most of their joint assets to an offshore account under Melissa's name a week before the murder. He had updated his will, leaving everything to a foundation he had established to provide counseling for victims of adoption fraud. Most disturbing were the contents of a locked cabinet in Nathan's home office. Inside, investigators found detailed dossiers on everyone connected to Dr. Maxwell's twin study, complete with home addresses, daily routines, and in some cases photographs taken from surveillance positions near their homes. It wasn't just Melissa he planned to kill, Detective Rivera concluded in his report. This was meant to be the first of multiple executions. The cruise tickets were a red herring, designed to throw off investigators after he completed what he saw as his mission of justice. Among the dossiers was one on William and Patricia Thompson, Melissa's adoptive parents. Attached to their file was a handwritten note reading, "They knew, they had to have known. Their punishment comes next." When confronted with this evidence during interrogation, Nathan neither confirmed nor denied planning additional murders. His only response, according to the interrogation transcript, was, "It doesn't matter now. Melissa is at peace. The rest of them will have to live with what they did." As the investigation continued, detectives tracked down many of the individuals mentioned in Nathan's research. Some confirmed aspects of his findings about Dr. Maxwell's study, while others denied any knowledge of the experiment. Caroline Maxwell, perhaps fearing legal consequences for her late husband's actions, initially retracted her statements to Nathan, claiming he had misunderstood her comments about her husband's research. However, when confronted with the detailed files Nathan had taken from her basement, she eventually admitted that Gerald Maxwell had indeed conducted unauthorized twin studies. He thought he was advancing science, she told investigators. He believed that understanding the balance between genetics and environment was the key to human development, but he went too far. When those twins, Nathan and Melissa, met at Syracuse and formed a relationship, Gerald should have intervened. "I told him to intervene, but he said it was too valuable an opportunity to observe genetic sexual attraction in action." The revelation that a respected psychologist had deliberately allowed siblings to enter into a romantic and sexual relationship for the sake of research sent shockwaves through the scientific community. The American Psychological Association issued a formal condemnation of Dr. Maxwell's work, and several universities that had received funding from his foundation announced investigations into potential ethical violations in their research departments. Meanwhile, the legal case against Nathan Caldwell was building. Despite his attorney's efforts to pursue an insanity defense, psychiatric evaluations determined that Nathan, while suffering from acute stress disorder and possible psychotic features, had been fully aware of the nature and wrongfulness of his actions when he killed Melissa. The level of planning and premeditation exhibited by Mr. Caldwell contradicts any claim of diminished capacity, wrote Dr. Elaine Harper in her evaluation. His journal entries show a man who methodically researched his situation, identified those he believed were responsible, and made a conscious decision to take his wife's life. The clarity with which he documented his thought process indicates he understood exactly what he was doing. The trial of Nathan Caldwell began on November 4, 2019, at the Connecticut Superior Court in Danbury. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Alexandra Powell, charged Nathan with first-degree murder, emphasizing the premeditated nature of the crime and the vulnerability of the victim. Melissa Caldwell was a victim twice over, Powell stated in her opening argument. First, as an infant, when she was separated from her twin brother as part of an unethical experiment. And again, 25 years later, when the one person she should have been able to trust, her husband, decided that her life was his to take. Nathan Caldwell appointed himself judge, jury, and executioner, not only of those he believed had wronged him, but of the woman who had shared his life, who was as much a victim of deception as he was. Nathan's defense team, led by attorney James Moretti, did not dispute that Nathan had killed Melissa. Instead, they focused on his mental state and the extraordinary circumstances that had led to the tragedy. No human being should have to endure what Nathan Caldwell endured, Moretti argued. To discover that your entire marriage, your most intimate relationship, was built on a foundation of manipulation and lies. To learn that you had unwittingly committed incest for 25 years. This is psychological trauma beyond what most of us can comprehend. The defense brought in experts on psychological trauma, including Dr. Lauren Fitzpatrick, a specialist in identity disruption. When your core identity is shattered, Dr. Fitzpatrick testified, the psyche looks for ways to restore order and meaning. For Nathan Caldwell, that meant recasting himself not as a victim, but as an avenger, someone who could right the wrongs done to him and his sister. It's a maladaptive coping mechanism, but one that's understandable given the extreme circumstances. The prosecution countered with testimony from Melissa's friends and colleagues, painting a picture of a vibrant, loving woman whose life had been cut short. Rebecca Lawson, who had received Melissa's final text message, gave particularly moving testimony. Melissa was afraid that night, Lawson told the court, her voice breaking. She wasn't part of some suicide pact. She was trying to help the man she thought was her husband, trying to get him medical help. Instead, he killed her. Whatever Nathan had discovered, whatever pain he was in, it gave him no right to decide that Melissa shouldn't live. Perhaps the most damning evidence came from Dr. Samuel Levine, the psychiatrist whom Melissa had tried to get Nathan to see in the weeks before her death. Dr. Levine testified that he had spoken briefly with Melissa when she called to make the appointment. For Nathan, she was concerned about his mental health, Dr. Levine stated. She described symptoms consistent with severe depression and possible paranoid ideation. She told me, he keeps saying people have lied to us our whole lives, that there's some conspiracy. She was trying to get him help. If he had come to that appointment, if he had begun treatment, this tragedy might have been averted. Throughout the trial, Nathan remained largely impassive, speaking only when addressed directly by the judge. He declined to testify in his own defense, a decision that his attorney later admitted was strategic. Nathan still believes he did the right thing, Moretti told reporters after the trial. Putting him on the stand would have revealed a man who feels justified in having taken his wife's life. That would not have helped our case. After 7 days of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict on November 15, 2019, guilty of murder in the first degree. At the sentencing hearing on December 3rd, Nathan was given an opportunity to make a statement to the court. Breaking his silence for the first time since the trial began, he delivered a chilling address that offered no remorse, only a reiteration of his twisted logic. "What happened to Melissa and me was a crime against nature," he said, his voice steady. "We were robbed of our true identities, manipulated into committing acts that violated the most fundamental human taboos. I don't expect those who haven't lived through such a revelation to understand my actions, but I want the court to know that I loved my sister. Not as a husband loves a wife, which was the abomination forced upon us, but as a brother loves His twin. I freed her from shame. I freed her from the knowledge that would have destroyed her as it destroyed me. Judge Margaret Holloway, unmoved by Nathan's statement, sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In her remarks, she acknowledged the extraordinary circumstances of the case, but emphasized that they did not justify murder. The court recognizes that you, Mr. Caldwell, were the victim of unethical practices that profoundly affected your life, Judge Holloway stated. The separation of you and your sister at birth, the manipulation that led to your relationship, these were serious wrongs committed against both of you. But Melissa Caldwell was not your property. Her life was not yours to take, regardless of your shared genetic heritage or the deceptions practiced upon you both. She deserved the chance to process this information, to seek help, to rebuild her life with the truth. You stole that chance from her, and for that, you must bear the full weight of the law. As Nathan was led from the courtroom, the case that had captivated the nation entered a new phase. The revelations about Dr. Maxwell's twin study prompted investigations into similar adoption practices across the country. Several of the other twin pairs identified in Maxwell's files were located and informed of their true relationships. 2 filed lawsuits against the estates of those involved in separating them, resulting in multi-million-dollar settlements. The Maxwell Foundation for Psychological Research, which had continued to operate after Gerald Maxwell's death, was disbanded, its assets frozen pending investigation. Caroline Maxwell, though never criminally charged due to lack of evidence that she had actively participated in her husband's research, faced civil litigation from multiple parties, including the families of the separated twins. New legislation was proposed in several states to strengthen oversight of adoption agencies and to create more robust systems for maintaining birth records. The Brennan Twins Act, named for Nathan and Melissa's biological surname, was introduced in Congress, aimed at preventing similar tragedies by ensuring that biological siblings could not unknowingly enter into romantic relationships. For the Thompson and Caldwell families, the adoptive parents who had raised Nathan and Melissa, the aftermath brought a different kind of pain. Both couples maintained they had known nothing about the true nature of the adoptions or about Dr. Maxwell's study. They had lost not only the children they had raised, but also their belief in the legitimacy of their families. "We thought we were giving a home to a child who needed one," Eleanor Caldwell told reporters after the trial. "We never imagined we were participating in something so horrible. Nathan will always be our son, no matter what he's done. But I wake up every day wondering if we could have somehow prevented this tragedy, if we'd asked more questions all those years ago." Patricia Thompson, who had lost her daughter to Nathan's violence, expressed similar regret but also anger. "These people played God with our children's lives," she said during a television interview. Gerald Maxwell, the hospital administrators who covered up the switch, everyone who knew and said nothing, they all have Melissa's blood on their hands. Nathan pulled the trigger and he deserves to be in prison, but he's not the only one responsible for what happened. Nathan Caldwell was transferred to the Northern Correctional Institution in Somers, Connecticut, where he remains incarcerated to this day. According to prison officials, he keeps to himself, rarely receiving visitors. The only person who sees him regularly is Troy Simmons, the private investigator who helped him uncover the truth about his relationship with Melissa. "I still don't know if I did the right thing helping him with that investigation," Simmons admitted in a 2021 interview. "If I had recognized how unstable he was becoming, if I had alerted someone, maybe Melissa would still be alive. That's something I'll have to live with for the rest of my life." The Ridgefield house where the murder took place remained unoccupied for over a year, becoming something of a macabre tourist attraction despite the neighborhood's efforts to discourage rubberneckers. It was finally sold in April 2020 to a family who renovated it extensively, hoping to erase the lingering shadow of the tragedy that had occurred within its walls. But for those involved in the case, the police officers who found Melissa's body, the detectives who unraveled Nathan's plans, the jurors who convicted him, and the families forever altered by the events of March 17, 2019, the story of the Caldwell twins serves as a haunting reminder of how secrets, lies, and ethical failures can ripple through generations, ultimately erupting in violence and heartbreak. As Detective Rivera reflected in a 2022 documentary about the case, sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes it destroys everything you thought you knew about yourself and the world. Nathan Caldwell couldn't handle that truth, and Melissa paid the price. But the real crime here began decades earlier, when people who should have known better decided to play with human lives like they were laboratory specimens. That's the real tragedy of the Caldwell case. It never had to happen. The full extent of Dr. Maxwell's twin study may never be known. While 7 twin pairs were identified from his files, researchers analyzing adoption records from New Beginnings Family Services believe there could be more. Siblings separated at birth who still don't know their true identities or their connection to one another. For these unknowing participants in Maxwell's twisted experiment, the revelation of Nathan and Melissa's story brought a disturbing possibility into focus, that the stranger they passed on the street, the colleague they worked alongside, or even the person they fell in love with could be their own flesh and blood, a sibling lost to them through deception and manipulation. It's a chilling thought, one that continues to haunt adoptees and their families across the country. A legacy of fear born from what was perhaps the most twisted experiment in the dark history of psychological research. 5 years after Nathan Caldwell's conviction, the shockwaves from the case continue to reverberate through American society, the legal system, and the field of psychological research. What began as a horrific tragedy in a Connecticut suburb has sparked a nationwide reckoning with the dark history of adoption practices, twin studies, and the ethical boundaries of scientific research. In April 2024, the Connecticut Department of Corrections released the first public statement regarding Nathan Caldwell's incarceration at Northern Correctional Institution. According to prison officials, Caldwell has maintained a model prisoner status, spending most of his time in the prison library researching adoption law and bioethics. He has refused all requests for interviews from journalists, authors, and documentary filmmakers, communicating only with his attorney and with Troy Simmons, the private investigator who helped uncover his true relationship with Melissa. Nathan believes his case is being misrepresented in the media, Simmons revealed in a rare interview with the Hartford Courier in 2023. He doesn't see himself as a murderer, but as someone who exposed a vast conspiracy. In his mind, he's still fighting for justice, for himself, for Melissa, and for all the other twins who were separated by Maxwell's experiment. That experiment, formerly known as Project Genesis, but now commonly referred to as the Maxwell study, has become the subject of intensive investigation by journalists, academics, and law enforcement. The 7 twin pairs identified in Maxwell's original files were only the beginning. As researchers gained access to New Beginnings' complete records, seized as evidence in multiple civil lawsuits, they discovered that Dr. Maxwell's experiment was more extensive than initially thought. Between 1969 and 1989, at least 15 pairs of twins or triplets had been deliberately separated at birth and placed with different adoptive families as part of Maxwell's study. The majority were identical twins, but 3 pairs, including Nathan and Melissa, were semi-identical twins, making them particularly valuable to Maxwell's research into genetic sexual attraction. Dr. Eleanor Whitman, a bioethicist at Johns Hopkins University who has spent the past 4 years analyzing Maxwell's research methodology, describes his work as breathtaking in its callousness. What sets the Maxwell study apart from other unethical twin studies is the deliberate attempt to manipulate adult relationships, Dr. Whitman explained during a 2022 symposium on research ethics. Maxwell wasn't content to simply observe twins raised in different environments. He actively engineered situations where they would meet as adults, documenting their interactions without their knowledge or consent. In cases where these twins formed romantic attachments, Maxwell allowed these relationships to progress, treating incest as just another data point in his research. The discovery of Maxwell's extensive research network sent shockwaves through academic institutions across the country. Maxwell had collaborators at several prestigious universities, many of whom had been unaware of the full scope of his work, but had nonetheless contributed to what one journalist called the most depraved psychological experiment in American history. Among these unwitting accomplices was Dr. Thomas Hargrove, a former psychology professor at Syracuse University who had encouraged Nathan and Melissa's relationship during their college years. When investigators questioned Hargrove in 2020, he admitted to having been asked by Maxwell to keep an eye on certain students and report back on their interactions, but claimed he had no idea they were siblings. Gerald told me he was conducting a long-term study on compatibility in romantic relationships, Hargrove stated in a deposition for one of the civil lawsuits filed against Maxwell's estate. He said these students had been identified in childhood as having certain psychological profiles that made them potential matches. There was never any mention of them being related. Whether Hargrove was truly ignorant of Maxwell's aims or simply trying to distance himself from the scandal remains a matter of debate. What is certain is that he was one of dozens of professionals, psychology professors, guidance counselors, family doctors, even neighborhood acquaintances, whom Maxwell had recruited to observe and report on the twins in his study. This, a vast surveillance network, maintained through a combination of professional connections, financial incentives, and in some cases, blackmail, allowed Maxwell to track his subjects throughout their lives, documenting their development, relationships, and in some cases, their romantic entanglements with their own siblings. The full extent of Maxwell's research only came to light in 2021, when Caroline Maxwell, faced with mounting legal pressure and public condemnation, surrendered a previously unknown set of files that her husband had kept in a storage facility under a pseudonym. These documents, which became known as the Black Box Files, contained detailed observations of all 15 twin pairs, including photographs, psychological evaluations, and in some cases, audio recordings of their interactions. Most disturbing were the records pertaining to what Maxwell called convergence events, the manufactured circumstances that brought separated twins together as adults. In some cases, these meetings were relatively benign, arranged through mutual friends, or seemingly coincidental enrollment at the same university. In others, Maxwell had gone to extraordinary lengths to engineer romantic encounters, manipulating job opportunities, housing situations, and social circles to bring siblings together in ways designed to foster attraction. He was playing God, said FBI Special Agent Dominic Vasquez, who led a federal investigation into the Maxwell study after the discovery of the Black Box Files. He decided who would meet, who would fall in love, who would live their lives in ignorance of their true identities, and he did it all in the name of science. The impact of these revelations on the twins involved in the study has been profound. Of the 15 pairs identified, 8 had met as adults before the Caldwell case brought Maxwell's experiment to light. 3 of these pairs, including Nathan and Melissa, had formed romantic relationships, unaware of their biological connection. The remaining 5 had formed friendships or professional relationships, often noting an inexplicable sense of familiarity or connection that they couldn't quite explain. Andrea and Mark Sullivan were among those who had met without realizing they were twins. Separated at birth in 1975, they encountered each other in 2003 when both took jobs at the same advertising agency in Chicago. We became instant friends, Andrea recalled in a 2022 interview with Psychology Today. Everyone at the office joked about how similar we were. Same laugh, same mannerisms, same weird food preferences. We even found out we had the same obscure allergies. But we never suspected the truth. When the Caldwell case made headlines, Andrea's adoptive mother recognized the pattern and contacted authorities. DNA testing confirmed what they had begun to suspect. Andrea and Mark were fraternal twins, separated as part of Maxwell's study. Finding out Mark was my brother was shocking, but in a strange way it also made perfect sense, Andrea said. That feeling of connection we'd always had, suddenly it had an explanation. We were lucky. Our relationship had always been platonic. I can't imagine the horror Nathan and Melissa faced when they discovered the truth after decades of marriage. For the twins who hadn't yet met when Maxwell's experiment was exposed, the revelation brought a different kind of trauma. Suddenly faced with the knowledge that they had a twin somewhere in the world, a twin who had been deliberately kept from them, many embarked on emotional searches for their siblings. Jennifer Woods was 43 when she learned she had an identical twin sister, Amanda, living less than 30 miles away in Portland, Oregon. Both had been raised by single mothers who had been told their adopted daughters were only children. I spent my whole life feeling like something was missing, Jennifer said in a documentary about Maxwell's victims. I used to have these dreams about having a sister, someone who understood me completely. Finding Amanda was like finding a part of myself I never knew was lost. But it also came with anger. Anger that we lost 43 years together because some researcher decided our lives were his to experiment with. The reunions weren't always positive. Some twins, upon finding their siblings, discovered they had little in common beyond their genetic makeup. Others found the emotional burden of connecting with a stranger who shared their face, but not their history, too overwhelming to bear. A few refused contact altogether, unwilling to disrupt the identities they had built or to confront the ethical violations that had shaped their lives without their knowledge. For the adoptive families, the revelations about Maxwell's study brought a complex mix of emotions. Many parents, like Robert and Eleanor Caldwell, had been unaware of their children's true origins. They had believed they were providing homes for orphaned or abandoned children, never suspecting they were unwitting participants in an unethical experiment. Patricia Thompson, Melissa's adoptive mother, became an outspoken advocate for adoption reform following her daughter's murder. In 2022, she published a memoir, The Daughter I Lost Twice, chronicling her experience raising Melissa and the devastating impact of learning the truth too late to save her. The adoption agency told us Melissa was an only child whose teenage mother couldn't care for her, Thompson wrote. They presented forged documents, created a fictional history for her. We believed every word. We never imagined we were separating her from her twin brother, never dreamed we were pawns in some mad scientist's game. That guilt, wondering if we could have somehow known, somehow prevented what happened, will haunt me until my dying day. The legal fallout from the Maxwell study has been extensive. By 2024, over 30 lawsuits had been filed against Maxwell's estate, New Beginnings Family Services, and various institutions connected to his research. While Maxwell himself had died in 2001, his substantial estate, valued at over $15 million, became the target of civil litigation from former research subjects and their families. The first major settlement came in 2022, when Caroline Maxwell, agreed to liquidate all of her husband's assets and create a fund for the victims of his research. The $12.3 million settlement was divided among the surviving twins and the families of those who had died, including Patricia and William Thompson, who received $1.5 million in compensation for Melissa's wrongful death. Beyond the financial settlements, the legal system has struggled to address the unique challenges presented by the Maxwell case. Traditional laws regarding medical malpractice, research ethics, and adoption fraud weren't designed to address the systematic deception and manipulation that characterized Maxwell's work. In response, legislators in 27 states have introduced bills to strengthen oversight of adoption agencies, psychological research, and twin studies. The Federal Brennan Twins Protection Act, first proposed in 2020, was finally passed by Congress in 2023, establishing new guidelines for adoption transparency and creating a national registry designed to prevent biological siblings from unknowingly entering into romantic relationships. This legislation won't undo the damage that's already been done, said Senator Michaela Rodriguez, the bill's primary sponsor. But it will help ensure that no one else has to experience the trauma that Nathan and Melissa Caldwell and the other victims of the Maxwell study endured. We can't change the past, but we can create safeguards for the future. The scientific community, too, has been forced to reckon with the ethical failures that allowed Maxwell's research to continue unchecked for 2 decades. The American Psychological Association established a task force to review historical research practices and identify other potentially unethical studies that may have escaped scrutiny. Dr. Jonathan Pierce, chair of the task force, described the Maxwell study as a wake-up call for all of us in the field. For too long, we've operated on the assumption that serious ethical violations were a thing of the past, Dr. Pierce said during a 2023 conference on research ethics. The Maxwell case demonstrates that unethical research can persist even in modern times, hidden behind a veneer of academic respectability. Our discipline needs to do better at policing itself, at creating systems that prioritize human dignity over data collection. The cultural impact of the Caldwell case has extended far beyond academic and legal circles. The story of twins separated at birth who unknowingly married has captured the public imagination, spawning documentaries, books, and even a Broadway play, Blood Ties, which won the Tony Award for Best New Drama in 2023. Critics have accused some of these productions of exploiting the Caldwell tragedy for entertainment, turning real suffering into melodrama. Others argue that these cultural works serve an important purpose in raising awareness about adoption ethics and the potential consequences of scientific overreach. Melissa Caldwell's friend Rebecca Lawson has become an outspoken critic of media. Coverage that focuses on the sensational aspects of the case while ignoring its human tragedy. Everyone wants to talk about the twins who married each other, Lawson said in a 2023 interview. They turn it into this salacious story, this modern-day Greek tragedy, but they forget that Melissa was a real person, funny, kind, brilliant. She had plans and dreams. She would have turned 50 this year. Instead, her life was cut short because of decisions made before she was even born, because of secrets kept by people who should have protected her. For the surviving twins from Maxwell's study, the media attention has been a mixed blessing. Some have chosen to speak publicly about their experiences, using their stories to advocate for adoption reform and research ethics. Others have sought anonymity, changing their names and relocating to escape the shadow of Maxwell's experiment. Jennifer and Amanda Woods, the Portland twins who found each other after 43 years apart, established the Separated Siblings Foundation. In 2022, an organization dedicated to helping reunite twins and other siblings separated through closed or fraudulent adoptions. Our story had a happy ending. We found each other. We formed a relationship. We're building the bond we should have had all along, Jennifer explained at the foundation's launch. But we know not everyone is so fortunate. Some twins never find each other. Others, like Nathan and Melissa, find each other too late and in the wrong context. Our foundation exists to help people navigate these complicated reunions and to advocate for transparency in adoption. The psychological impact of discovering a twin after decades of separation has become an emerging area of research, with several studies examining the phenomenon of twin strangers, biological siblings who meet as adults after being raised in different environments. Dr. Rachel Abrams, a psychologist specializing in adoption trauma, has worked with several of Maxwell's subjects as they navigate their newfound sibling relationships. The twin bond is one of the most profound connections in human experience. Dr. Abrams explained in a 2024 paper on the subject, when that bond is disrupted through separation at birth, there can be a sense of loss that persists, even if the individuals aren't consciously aware of having a twin. When reunited as adults, many twins report an immediate sense of recognition, of having found their other half. But this reunion also comes with grief for the years lost, anger at those responsible for the separation, and the challenge of integrating this new relationship into an already established identity. For twins who discovered they had formed romantic relationships with their siblings, the psychological trauma is particularly severe. Of the 3 couples identified in Maxwell's research, one had divorced immediately upon learning the truth. Another had attempted to transition their relationship to a platonic sibling bond with mixed success. The third, Nathan and Melissa, had ended in tragedy. Dr. Abrams emphasizes that there is no right way for twins in this situation to respond. Each person has to find their own path through this unimaginable scenario, she said. What we can do as mental health professionals is provide support without judgment, help them process the complex emotions involved, and advocate for systems that prevent such situations from occurring in the future. As for Nathan Caldwell, his legacy remains complex and contested. To some, particularly in online forums dedicated to discussing the case, he is a victim driven to extremes by an unimaginable revelation. To others, he is simply a murderer who used his tragic circumstances to justify violence. The truth, as is often the case, likely lies somewhere in between. Court-appointed psychiatrists who evaluated Nathan described him as a man whose identity had been completely shattered, leaving him vulnerable to delusions and paranoia. Yet they also noted his capacity for meticulous planning, his deliberate decision to end Melissa's life rather than allow her to process the truth in her own way. Nathan Caldwell's story is not just about a murder, wrote journalist Maya Saperstein in her 2023 book, Separated at Birth, The Maxwell Study and Its Victims. It's about the cascading consequences of ethical failures, about the human cost of treating people as research subjects rather than individuals with autonomy and dignity. It's about what happens when the foundation of someone's identity is revealed, to be built on deception. As Nathan continues to serve his life sentence, the full impact of the Maxwell study is still unfolding. Researchers believe there may be additional twin pairs who haven't yet been identified or notified of their true relationships. The process of combing through New Beginnings records, cross-referencing adoption files, and conducting DNA tests is ongoing, coordinated by a task force composed of law enforcement officials, adoption experts, and genetic counselors. For those twins who have already discovered their connections, the journey of reconciliation with their siblings, with their adoptive families, with their own identities, continues. Some find healing in their newfound relationships, others in advocacy work aimed at preventing similar tragedies in the future. What unites all the victims of Maxwell's experiment is the recognition that their lives were fundamentally altered by decisions made without their knowledge or consent, decisions that, in the most tragic case, led to Melissa Caldwell's death and Nathan's imprisonment. The Maxwell study wasn't just bad science, said Dr. Eleanor Whitman. It was a profound violation of human dignity, a reminder of what happens when researchers forget that behind every data point is a real person whose life matters. The twins separated by Maxwell's experiment deserved better. They deserved the truth from the beginning. As the investigation into Dr. Gerald Maxwell's twin study continued to expand in scope and implications, a startling discovery in early 2024 opened yet another disturbing chapter in the saga. During a routine inventory of evidence from the Caldwell case, Detective Marcus Rivera, who had remained involved with the investigation even after Nathan's conviction, came across a flash drive that had been overlooked in the initial processing of materials seized from Nathan's home office. The drive, hidden inside a hollowed-out book on Nathan's bookshelf, contained encrypted files that took forensic analysts 3 months to access. What they found inside sent shockwaves through everyone connected to the case. Evidence suggesting that Melissa Thompson Caldwell had actually discovered the truth about her relationship with Nathan nearly 3 months before her death, and had chosen to hide this knowledge from him. The encrypted files included screenshots of emails between Melissa and a private genetic counselor she had consulted in December 2018, discussing the results of a separate DNA test she had taken without Nathan's knowledge. The counselor had identified the sibling relationship and had urged Melissa to seek immediate psychological support and legal advice regarding her marriage. "I understand this is an unimaginable situation," the counselor wrote in one email dated December 12, 2018. "But given the genetic confirmation of your biological relationship to your husband, I strongly recommend addressing this immediately. This has significant psychological, legal, and potentially medical implications that shouldn't be ignored." Melissa's response, dated the same day, revealed her initial struggle to accept the truth. "I can't process this. It has to be a mistake. Nathan and I have been married for 24 years. We grew up in different states with different families. How could we possibly be siblings? Please run the test again. There must be an error in your lab." Subsequent emails showed the counselor confirming the results with a second analysis and providing Melissa with resources for psychological support. The final email from Melissa, sent on January 3, 2019, revealed her decision to keep the discovery to herself. "After much reflection, I've decided not to disclose this information to Nathan right now. He's been struggling with depression for months, and I'm afraid this revelation could push him over the edge. I'm consulting with a therapist privately to process this shock. Once I've found a way to accept it myself, I'll find the right moment to talk to him. For now, this has to remain confidential. This revelation cast the final weeks of Melissa's life in an entirely new light." According to her private journal, also recovered from the flash drive, Melissa had been secretly planning an exit strategy from her marriage, while simultaneously trying to ensure Nathan received psychiatric help before she confronted him with the truth. "I've made an appointment for Nathan with Dr. Levine," she wrote on February 4, 2019. "I told him it's for his depression, which isn't a lie. But I need him stabilized before I can tell him what I know. I've consulted with an attorney about annulling the marriage. She says given the circumstances, it should be legally straightforward, though the emotional aftermath will be anything but. I've started looking at apartments in Boston, a fresh start, far enough away to build a new life, but close enough that Nathan and I can eventually build whatever kind of relationship is possible between siblings who spent 25 years as husband and wife. The discovery of Melissa's knowledge fundamentally altered the understanding of the case's timeline. While Nathan had been conducting his meticulous investigation into their true relationship, Melissa had been conducting her own parallel inquiry, arriving at the same horrifying conclusion, but choosing a radically different response. This changes everything about how we understand the dynamics between Nathan and Melissa in those final weeks, said Dr. Elaine Harper, the forensic psychologist who had evaluated Nathan. He was hiding his knowledge from her. She was hiding her knowledge from him, and both were making unilateral decisions about how to proceed. It was a powder keg waiting to explode. The flash drive also contained Melissa's research into Dr. Maxwell's study, less extensive than Nathan's, but focusing specifically on the psychological impact of genetic sexual attraction between reunited siblings. Her browser history showed visits to support forums for adopted individuals who had discovered biological relatives as adults, as well as consultations with legal experts specializing in complex annulment cases. Most poignantly, the drive contained a draft of a letter Melissa had been writing to Nathan, apparently intended to be given to him after he had begun psychiatric treatment. Nathan, my dearest, by the time you read this, you'll likely have learned the truth that I've been struggling with for weeks. We are not meant to be husband and wife. We never were. The bond we've always felt, that immediate connection that drew us together at Syracuse, wasn't romantic love as we understood it. It was the profound connection of twins who recognized each other on some primal level that our conscious minds couldn't comprehend. I don't know yet how to process 25 years of memories that now feel distorted by this revelation. I don't know if I'll ever fully come to terms with what this means for my identity, for your identity, for the life we built together. But I do know that we need to face this truth together as the siblings we actually are. I've arranged for an apartment in Boston. I'll be moving there next month, not to abandon you, but to give us both the space to redefine our relationship. The love I feel for you hasn't diminished, it's transformed. You are my brother, my twin, my oldest and deepest connection in this world. We've lost so many years of knowing each other as siblings. I don't want to lose any more time to anger or denial. This isn't your fault. It isn't my fault. We were victims of a manipulation so profound that we still don't understand its full scope. But we have the chance now to reclaim our narrative, to forge a new relationship based on truth rather than deception. I hope you'll eventually join me in Boston, not as my husband but as my brother. We have the rest of our lives to discover what that means, with love always. Melissa, your sister. The letter, never completed and never delivered, offered a glimpse of the future Melissa had been planning. A future cut short by Nathan's decision to end her life, rather than allow her the autonomy to define their new relationship on her own terms. When presented with this new evidence during a prison interview in May 2024, Nathan initially refused to believe that Melissa had known the truth before him. According to the transcript of the interview conducted by Detective Rivera and Dr. Harper, Nathan became visibly agitated. "This is fabricated. This is someone trying to make me look worse than I already do." Melissa didn't know. If she had known, she would have told me. We never kept secrets from each other. When shown the forensic evidence confirming the authenticity of the files, Nathan fell silent for several minutes before responding. If she knew and didn't tell me, then she was part of the deception. Everyone in my life was lying to me. Everyone. This response, according to Dr. Harper, revealed the depth of Nathan's paranoia and his inability to recognize Melissa's right to process the traumatic revelation in her own way and time. Nathan saw himself as the victim of a grand conspiracy, Dr. Harper noted in her follow-up report. When presented with evidence that Melissa had made different choices than he did, choices that prioritized emotional well-being and careful planning, over immediate confrontation, he immediately recast her as part of that conspiracy rather than as a fellow victim trying to navigate an impossible situation. The revelation of Melissa's independent discovery sparked renewed interest in the case from both the media and the academic community. Psychologists specializing in trauma and identity formation pointed to the stark contrast between Nathan's and Melissa's responses as evidence of how differently individuals can react to the same devastating information. Melissa chose a path of gradual adjustment and planned transition, explained Dr. Sophia Chen, a specialist in trauma psychology at Yale University. She sought professional help, created a structured exit strategy, and even began envisioning a new kind of relationship with Nathan as her brother. Nathan, conversely, spiraled into rage and vengeance, fixating on punishing those he held responsible rather than adapting to the new reality. According to Dr. Chen, these divergent reactions likely stemmed from pre-existing psychological differences between the twins, as well as their different life experiences, despite their shared genetic makeup. Even identical twins raised in the same household develop distinct personalities and coping mechanisms, Dr. Chen noted in a 2024 paper on the case. Nathan and Melissa, raised in different environments with different family dynamics, would naturally have developed very different psychological resources for handling trauma. What's remarkable is that Melissa, despite experiencing the same shocking revelation, maintained empathy for Nathan throughout her private writings. She continued to see him as someone she loved and wanted to protect, even as she planned to fundamentally change their relationship. The discovery of Melissa's parallel investigation also raised new questions about the night of her murder. If she had known the truth for months and was actively planning to leave the marriage, what happened on March 17, 2019, that led to her death? Review of the evidence, including the text message Melissa sent to Rebecca Lawson at 2:38 a.m., suggested a new interpretation of events. Rather than Nathan revealing the truth to an unsuspecting Melissa, as he had claimed, it now appeared that the confrontation began when Melissa realized Nathan had discovered the same information she had been hiding from him. Nathan saying, "We're brother and sister twins," Melissa had texted Lawson. The wording suggested she wasn't shocked by the claim itself, only by the fact that Nathan now knew it too. Her concern that he was having a breakdown indicated she recognized his psychological state was fragile, confirming her earlier fears about revealing the truth to him. The final hours of Melissa's life were likely spent trying to manage Nathan's volatile reaction to a truth she had already been processing for months. According to forensic analysis of the crime scene, Melissa had been backing away from Nathan when he began shooting, suggesting she had been trying to de-escalate the situation rather than responding with the shock and horror Nathan had anticipated. The tragedy here is multi-layered, said District Attorney Alexandra Powell, who had prosecuted Nathan. Melissa was trying to protect both of them from the psychological impact of this revelation. She was creating a path forward that might have allowed them both to heal. Nathan, consumed by rage at what he saw as a lifetime of manipulation, couldn't see that path. He could only see destruction. The flash drive contained one final document that added yet another dimension to the tragedy: medical records showing that Melissa had scheduled a comprehensive health screening for February 2019, the same type of screening that had led Nathan to discover the genetic anomaly that first set him on his path to uncovering their true relationship. The bitter irony, noted Detective Rivera, is that they were both independently drawing closer to the truth. If they had discovered it together, if they had been able to support each other through the shock and grief, perhaps the outcome would have been different. For Patricia Thompson, Melissa's adoptive mother, the revelation that her daughter had known the truth and chosen a path of careful planning rather than confrontation came as no surprise. "That was Melissa," Thompson said in an interview following the discovery. Thoughtful, methodical, always considering others' feelings, even in the midst of her own pain. She would have found a way forward for both of them if she'd been given the chance. That's what makes her murder all the more senseless. Nathan took away the possibility of healing, of redefining their relationship, of finding a new kind of love as the siblings they truly were. The impact of this new information extended beyond the Caldwell case to the broader community of twins, separated by Maxwell's experiment. For those who had discovered their siblings under less traumatic circumstances, Melissa's approach, careful planning, professional support, gradual transition, offered a potential model for managing such life-altering revelations. Jennifer and Amanda Woods, the Portland twins who had established the Separated Siblings Foundation, incorporated Melissa's writings into their resources for newly reunited siblings, emphasizing the importance of professional psychological support and structured transition plans. Melissa never got to complete her journey from wife to sister, Jennifer noted during a foundation event in June 2024. But her thoughtful approach, her emphasis on healing rather than blame, can guide others who find themselves navigating similarly complex territory. For Nathan Caldwell, the revelation of Melissa's knowledge and plans represented yet another loss of control over the narrative he had constructed. His attorney, James Moretti, reported that Nathan had become increasingly withdrawn following the discovery, refusing visits and communication for several weeks. The foundation of his justification was that he was protecting Melissa from a truth he believed would destroy her, Moretti explained, learning that she not only knew that truth but was handling it with greater emotional maturity than he could muster. It's forced a reckoning that I'm not sure he's equipped to face. When Nathan finally agreed to discuss the new evidence in July 2024, his perspective had shifted subtly but significantly. "I still believe what I did was a form of mercy," he told Dr. Harper during a follow-up evaluation. "But I recognize now that it wasn't Melissa who needed protection from the truth. It was me. I couldn't bear the thought of her walking away, of her redefining our relationship on her terms. I wanted to control how our story ended." This partial acknowledgement of his motivations, while falling short of true remorse, represented the first crack in Nathan's defensive narrative. According to Dr. Harper, it might eventually open the door to a more genuine confrontation with the reality of his actions. Healing from trauma of this magnitude isn't linear, Dr. Harper noted. For Nathan, accepting that Melissa had agency, that she had found a way forward that didn't involve violence or vengeance, that's a profound challenge to his self-image as her protector and avenger. It forces him to consider that he may have murdered his sister not to save her, but because he couldn't accept her autonomy. For the investigators who had worked the case since 2019, the discovery of Melissa's knowledge added another layer of tragedy to an already devastating story. "In all my years in law enforcement, the Caldwell case stands out for its complexity and its profound sadness," Detective Rivera reflected in August 2024. Two people, bound by biology but separated by circumstance, who found each other against astronomical odds, only to discover their relationship was founded on a deception neither of them created. One found a path toward acceptance and reimagining their future. The other chose violence. In the end, they both lost everything. not because of choices they made, but because of choices made for them decades before they were even born. The legal implications of Melissa's knowledge remained minimal. Nathan's conviction for first-degree murder stood regardless of whether Melissa had known about their true relationship. If anything, her planned departure made his actions seem more premeditated than previously understood. The cultural impact, however, was significant. The draft letter Melissa had written to Nathan, published with the Thompson family's permission, became a powerful symbol of resilience and adaptation in the face of trauma. Her words, "The love I feel for you hasn't diminished, it's transformed," were quoted in psychological literature, adoption resources, and even tattooed on the bodies of some who had experienced their own family revelations. A new documentary, Melissa's Truth, premiered in September 2024, focusing specifically on her perspective and planning in the months before her death. Unlike previous media coverage that had centered on Nathan's investigation and violence, this production attempted to reconstruct Melissa's private journey toward acceptance and transformation. "We wanted to reclaim Melissa's agency in this story," explained filmmaker Gabriela Ortiz. "For too long, she's been portrayed as merely Nathan's victim, the wife who didn't know, the sister who never got to be a sister. But the evidence shows a woman of remarkable strength and foresight, someone who was actively creating a path forward from an unimaginable situation. Her voice deserves to be heard." The documentary featured interviews with Melissa's friends, colleagues and therapists, speaking with the Thompson family's permission, offering glimpses of her state of mind in those final months. Though she had told no one the full truth about her relationship with Nathan, those closest to her had noticed subtle changes: her increased interest in adoption issues, her research into Boston apartments, her casual mentions of possibly transitioning to a long-distance relationship with Nathan. "She told me she and Nathan might need some time apart," recalled her colleague Maria Delgado. "She framed it as giving each other space to grow. Now I understand she was laying the groundwork for a complete redefinition of their relationship. She was so methodical, trying to create a soft landing for both of them from what must have been the most devastating revelation imaginable." For Patricia Thompson, the documentary offered a bittersweet opportunity to celebrate her daughter's strength while mourning the future she never got to create. "Melissa would have found a way through this," Thompson said in her interview. "She would have transformed her relationship with Nathan into something new, something honest. She would have helped him heal if he'd let her. That's who she was. A builder, not a destroyer. The world lost something precious when it lost her perspective on this impossible situation." As 2024 drew to a close, the Caldwell case had evolved from a sensational crime story to a complex case study in trauma response, adaptability, and the profound impact of genetic identity on human psychology. For the other twins, separated by Maxwell's experiment, Melissa's approach offered a template for reconciliation and transformation, while Nathan's path served as a stark warning about the dangers of isolation and rage in the face of identity disruption. The final chapter of the Caldwell tragedy may never be written. Nathan continues to serve his life sentence, slowly beginning to confront the full implications of his actions. The Maxwell study continues to yield new discoveries as researchers identify additional twin pairs and document the full scope of the experiment's impact. And Melissa's voice, preserved in her private writings, her draft letter to Nathan, and her methodical planning for a future that never arrived, continues to offer insight into a road not taken, a path toward healing that was cut short by violence born of the very trauma she was trying to transcend. "In the end," wrote journalist Maya Saperstein in the updated edition of her book on the case, "the Caldwell tragedy offers no easy lessons, no clear morals beyond the obvious condemnation of those who treated human lives as experimental subjects. What it offers instead is a portrait of two responses to the same devastating truth, one leading to violence and destruction, the other pointing toward acceptance and transformation. That Melissa's path was cut short by Nathan's choice is perhaps the greatest tragedy of all. We'll never know what wisdom might have emerged from her journey of reconciliation, what light she might have shed on one of the most profound identity crises imaginable. For those who continue to study and discuss the case, the discovery of Melissa's knowledge has added nuance to a story often reduced to sensational headlines. It has restored agency to a woman previously portrayed as merely a victim of circumstances beyond her control, and it has reinforced the central question at the heart of the Caldwell tragedy. Not just how two siblings could unknowingly marry, but how differently humans can respond to the same devastating truth about their own identity. As Detective Rivera noted in his final report on the case, the Maxwell study created the conditions for tragedy, but it was individual choices that determined the outcome. Melissa chose a path toward healing. Nathan chose destruction. In that difference lies the true heart of this case, not just what was done to them, but what they each chose to do with the truth once they discovered it. In October 2024, as the 5th anniversary of Nathan Caldwell's conviction approached, a startling development cast the entire case in yet another unexpected light. Caroline Maxwell, the widow of Dr. Gerald Maxwell, died at age 84 from complications of pneumonia. In her will, she directed her attorney to release a sealed package of documents that she had kept hidden for decades, materials she had previously denied existed when questioned by investigators. The package, delivered to the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, contained Dr. Maxwell's personal journal spanning from 1968 to 2001, along with detailed notes on what he called Project Genesis Phase 2. These documents revealed that the separation and manipulation of twins had been only the first stage of Maxwell's experiment. The second phase, which began in the early 1990s, involved a far more disturbing element: deliberate intervention to encourage romantic relationships between certain twin pairs. Among the documents was a memo dated September 15, 1991, just days after Nathan and Melissa met at Syracuse University. In it, Maxwell wrote to an associate identified only as RS. Subject pair B7, later identified as Nathan and Melissa, made initial contact at the Thompson gathering on 9/12. Initial observations are promising. Immediate mutual attraction, noted by on-site observers. Female subject reportedly commented on feeling she had known him, male subject, all my life. Precisely the response we've been waiting for. Implement Protocol 17 immediately. All environmental factors should be optimized to encourage relationship development. Weekly reports required. Protocol 17, detailed in another document, outlined specific strategies for encouraging romantic attachment between twins who had been separated at birth. These included manipulating social circles to increase contact, engineering chance encounters in romantic settings, and even influencing mutual friends to suggest compatibility. Most disturbing was the revelation that Maxwell had installed paid observers in Nathan and Melissa's lives. Individuals who posed as friends, colleagues, and neighbors, but who were actually reporting back on the development of their relationship. According to Maxwell's journals, these observers were instructed to actively encourage the relationship, particularly when either Nathan or Melissa expressed doubts or hesitations. The B7 male subject expressed concerns about the intensity of his feelings to observer JL today, Maxwell wrote in an entry dated November 1991. Described it as overwhelming, almost scary. Observer correctly implemented the response protocol, normalizing the feelings and suggesting they indicate deep compatibility rather than cause for concern. Female subject continues to express no reservations. Their relationship is progressing faster than any previous pair. The genetic attraction component appears exceptionally strong. These revelations sent shockwaves through the law enforcement and scientific communities. What had previously been understood as a deplorable but primarily observational study was now revealed as active manipulation designed to encourage incestuous relationships, a criminal enterprise spanning decades. This wasn't just unethical research, said FBI Special Agent Dominic Vasquez after reviewing the documents. This was orchestrated victimization on a scale we've rarely seen. Maxwell and his associates deliberately created the conditions for incestuous relationships, then stood back and documented the results like they were observing lab rats instead of human beings. For those involved in the case, the new information provided critical context for understanding both Nathan and Melissa's intense connection and the devastating impact of discovering its true nature. Their love-at-first-sight experience at Syracuse hadn't been merely the chance recognition of genetic similarity. It had been engineered and reinforced through constant subtle manipulation by people they believed were friends, but who were actually paid observers working for Maxwell. The Project Genesis Phase 2 documents identified 8 twin pairs who had been targeted for relationship development. Of these, 3, including Nathan and Melissa, had developed long-term romantic relationships. 2 pairs had briefly dated before ending the relationship, for various reasons unrelated to their biological connection. The remaining 3 had maintained platonic relationships despite Maxwell's attempts to engineer romantic attraction. For the survivors of Maxwell's experiment, this new revelation compounded an already profound trauma. Andrea and Mark Sullivan, the Chicago twins, who had formed a friendship without realizing they were siblings, discovered they had been targets of Maxwell's second phase, though the attempt to engineer a romantic relationship between them had failed. We always wondered why certain friends were so insistent that we should date, Andrea said in an interview following the revelation. There was this one woman, Heather, who was constantly telling Mark what a perfect match we would be, arranging situations where we would be alone together. We just thought she was being an annoying matchmaker. To learn she was a paid operative trying to manipulate us into an incestuous relationship, it makes me physically ill. The documents also shed new light on Nathan's psychological deterioration following his discovery of the truth. His paranoia about a vast conspiracy, previously considered a symptom of mental illness triggered by trauma, now appeared to be an accurate perception of reality. There had indeed been a coordinated effort to manipulate his and Melissa's lives, with dozens of individuals playing small but significant roles in engineering their relationship. For Dr. Elaine Harper, the forensic psychologist who had evaluated Nathan, the new information necessitated a re-evaluation of his mental state at the time of the murder. Nathan's perception that everyone in his life had been lying to him wasn't paranoid delusion. It was actually true, Dr. Harper noted in a supplemental report filed with the court. Many of the people he and Melissa believed were friends were in fact paid observers reporting to Maxwell. Their entire social circle at Syracuse was infiltrated by individuals working for the experiment. The betrayal Nathan experienced was even more profound than we initially understood. This revelation led Nathan's attorney, James Moretti, to file a motion for a new trial, arguing that the new evidence significantly altered understanding of his client's mental state. The motion highlighted Maxwell's deliberate manipulation of Nathan and Melissa's relationship and the extensive network of deception that surrounded them throughout their lives. My client was the victim of what amounts to lifelong psychological torture, Moretti argued in court filings. He was deliberately manipulated into forming a romantic and sexual relationship with his own sister, surrounded by individuals who facilitated this relationship while knowing the truth, and then left to deal with the devastating psychological consequences when he discovered the deception. This context is critical to understanding his actions on the night of March 17, 2019. The Connecticut Supreme Court agreed to review the case in light of the new evidence, though legal experts were divided on whether it would result in a modified sentence rather than a complete reversal of the conviction. The new evidence certainly provides important context about Nathan Caldwell's mental state, said legal analyst Teresa Montgomery. But it doesn't change the fundamental facts of the case. He still deliberately took Melissa's life when she was attempting to process their situation in a non-violent way. The court will have to weigh whether Maxwell's manipulation mitigates Caldwell's responsibility for his actions. Meanwhile, federal prosecutors opened a major investigation into the associates and enablers identified in Maxwell's documents. The statute of limitations had expired for many potential charges related to the original twin separations in the 1970s and 80s. But the active manipulation of adults into incestuous relationships in the 1990s and 2000s fell within prosecutable timeframes for various charges including fraud, conspiracy, and exploitation. By December 2024, federal agents had identified and located 23 individuals who had worked as observers or facilitators for Maxwell's Phase 2 operations. Several were prominent professionals, psychologists, academic advisors, even a college administrator who had helped ensure Nathan and Melissa would be placed in proximity at Syracuse. Others were individuals who had posed as friends, neighbors, or colleagues, insinuating themselves into the twins' lives specifically to monitor and influence their relationships. Among those identified was Thomas Reeves, Nathan's college roommate, who had remained in contact with him until his arrest. According to Maxwell's records, Reeves had been recruited specifically to room with Nathan and encourage his relationship with Melissa, receiving payments totaling over $30,000 for his role in the experiment. When federal agents interviewed Reeves in January 2025, he initially denied any knowledge of Maxwell's study. When presented with financial records showing payments from a shell company linked to Maxwell, however, Reeves admitted his involvement. "I was a broke college kid who needed money," Reeves told investigators, according to the interview transcript. "Maxwell approached me before freshman year, said he was conducting a study on relationship formation and needed observers. It seemed harmless at first, just reporting on who Nathan was dating, what he talked about. When he met Melissa, everything changed. Maxwell became intensely interested, wanted daily reports, gave me specific things to say to encourage them getting together." According to Reeves, he had initially been unaware that Nathan and Melissa were siblings. "Maxwell told me they were part of a compatibility study, two people with similar psychological profiles who might form an ideal relationship. I had no idea they were related. When I found out years later after Maxwell died, I was disgusted. But by then, they were married, seemed happy. I told myself it wasn't my place to blow up their lives." Reeves' testimony, along with that of other paid observers, painted a picture of systematic manipulation, far more extensive than previously understood. Maxwell hadn't simply observed the twins' behavior, he had actively shaped it through a network of individuals who influenced major life decisions, relationship dynamics, and even career choices. One of the most disturbing revelations came from Janet Winters, who had been Melissa's best friend at Syracuse, but was actually a graduate student paid by Maxwell to monitor and influence her. According to Winters, Maxwell had given her specific instructions to discourage Melissa from dating anyone before meeting Nathan. "I was told to find subtle ways to undermine her other relationships," Winters admitted in her FBI interview. "If she was interested in someone, I would point out flaws, raise doubts. When she met Nathan, I was instructed to do the opposite. Highlight compatibility, arrange for them to spend time together, and reinforce any positive feelings she expressed. I had no idea they were siblings. Maxwell told me they were ideal. Psychological matches being studied for compatibility research. For Patricia Thompson, Melissa's mother, these revelations brought a new dimension to her grief. To think that even her friendships were manipulated, that people she trusted were paid to shape her life, according to this man's experiment. "It's beyond comprehension," Thompson said in a statement released through her attorney. Melissa was betrayed not just by the adoption system, but by people she believed loved her. The extent of Maxwell's manipulation raised profound questions about consent and autonomy that extended beyond the Caldwell case to all victims of his experiment. If individuals are systematically influenced to make specific life choices, particularly choices with profound personal implications like marriage, without their knowledge or consent, can they be said to have made those choices freely? This case challenges our basic understanding of personal agency, noted bioethicist Dr. Eleanor Whitman. Nathan and Melissa believed they were making independent choices about their relationship, but those choices were being subtly shaped by a network of people following Maxwell's directives. Their consent to dating, to marriage, to building a life together was fundamentally compromised by manipulation they weren't aware of. This perspective was reflected in new federal charges brought against Maxwell's associates in March 2025. Rather than focusing solely on the deception involved in the experiment, prosecutors charged key facilitators with conspiracy to commit fraud and deprivation of civil rights, specifically the right to make informed decisions about one's own life and relationships. The victims of Project Genesis were robbed not just of their true identities, but of their autonomy, U.S. Attorney Gabriel Hernandez stated at a press conference announcing the charges. They were denied the basic human right to make authentic choices about who to love, who to marry, what kind of relationships to form. This case is fundamentally about the right of every individual to control their own destiny free from hidden manipulation. By April 2025, 7 of Maxwell's associates had accepted plea deals, agreeing to testify against others in exchange for reduced sentences. Their testimony revealed a research operation that had grown increasingly complex and morally corrupt over time, evolving from Maxwell's initial interest in studying separated twins to his obsession with engineering and documenting incestuous relationships. According to former colleague Dr. Lawrence Porter, Maxwell had become fixated on genetic sexual attraction after observing it occur naturally between reunited siblings in the 1980s. He began viewing it as the ultimate proof of genetic influence trumping social taboos, Porter testified. What started as scientific curiosity degenerated into something perverse. He wanted to see if he could create the conditions for genetic sexual attraction to flourish, then document its development as if he were observing a natural phenomenon rather than something he engineered. Porter's testimony also revealed that Maxwell had maintained secret observation of Nathan and Melissa's marriage until his death in 2001, with associates continuing the monitoring afterward under Caroline Maxwell's direction. They had cameras in the Caldwell home, installed during renovations by contractors working for Maxwell, Porter disclosed. Audio monitoring in their vehicles. Their computers were compromised. Maxwell collected data on every aspect of their relationship, emotional, financial, sexual. It was total surveillance under the guise of scientific observation. This revelation of extensive surveillance added yet another violation to the long list of transgressions against Nathan and Melissa's privacy and autonomy. It also raises disturbing questions about how many others might have been similarly monitored without their knowledge. For Nathan Caldwell, learning about the extent of Maxwell's manipulation provided both validation for his sense of betrayal and new anguish over what might have been. In a handwritten statement released through his attorney in May 2025, Nathan addressed the latest revelations. "I always knew something was wrong with how Melissa and I met, how intensely we connected. Learning that even that feeling, the one true thing I thought we had, was engineered through manipulation by people we trusted. It's another layer of betrayal I wasn't prepared for. I understand now why I spiraled into paranoia. The conspiracy I sensed was real, more real than even I imagined. But that doesn't bring Melissa back. It doesn't undo what I did. Sometimes I wonder if we had discovered the truth together, with no observers pushing us in one direction or another, could we have found the path Melissa was trying to create? A path to being brother and sister, without destroying everything we'd built? I'll never know. That possibility died with her. In June 2025, the Connecticut Supreme Court ruled on Nathan's appeal, denying the request for a new trial, but modifying his sentence to include mandatory psychiatric treatment focusing on trauma and identity disruption. The court acknowledged the extraordinary circumstances of the case, while maintaining that they did not justify the taking of Melissa's life. The evidence clearly shows that the defendant was subjected to lifelong manipulation that profoundly affected his psychological state, the court stated in its ruling. However, it also shows that the victim, despite experiencing the same manipulation and trauma, chose a non-violent path forward. The defendant's actions, while occurring in the context of extreme psychological distress, resulted in the death of another victim of the same conspiracy. For the other twins identified in Maxwell's Phase 2 records, the ongoing legal proceedings offered some measure of justice, but no real closure. The 7 individuals who had been manipulated into romantic relationships with their own siblings now faced the challenge of redefining their identities with full awareness of both their biological connection and the systematic deception that had shaped their lives. Michael and Sarah Collins, who had dated briefly in college before drifting apart, unaware they were fraternal twins, established a support group specifically for victims of Maxwell's relationship manipulation. "We're navigating territory no one should have to explore," Michael explained in an interview. "How do you process learning that a relationship you believed was natural attraction was actually engineered by others? How do you rebuild a healthy sibling relationship after romantic involvement, even if it was brief? There's no roadmap for this kind of trauma." The Collins Siblings Support Group, initially created for Maxwell's victims, eventually expanded to include other individuals who had discovered biological relationships with romantic partners, a phenomenon that, while rare, occurs with enough frequency to create a need for specialized psychological support. By September 2025, as the trials of Maxwell's associates continued, public attention had largely shifted from the sensational aspects of the Caldwell case to the broader ethical implications of Maxwell's research and the vulnerability of adoption systems to manipulation. The Brennan Twins Protection Act, passed in 2023, was expanded with additional provisions specifically targeting research ethics and adopting stricter penalties for psychological experimentation without informed consent. Adoption records in multiple states were open to adult adoptees, providing greater transparency and reducing the chance of siblings unknowingly forming relationships. For Patricia Thompson, these systemic changes represented a bittersweet legacy for her daughter. "Melissa would have wanted something positive to come from this tragedy," Thompson said at a congressional hearing on adoption reform. "She was always someone who tried to fix broken systems, to find constructive solutions to problems. These changes won't bring her back, but they might prevent others from experiencing similar trauma. The most profound impact of the Caldwell case, however, may be its contribution to our understanding of human identity and the complex interplay between genetic heritage, life experience, and personal autonomy. The contrast between Nathan and Melissa's responses to the same devastating revelation, one choosing destruction, the other seeking transformation, illuminates the range of human adaptation to trauma and the possibility of resilience even in the face of fundamental identity disruption. As Dr. Rachel Abrams noted in her 2025 book on the psychological impact of the Maxwell study, the Caldwell tragedy reminds us that while our identities are shaped by forces beyond our control, genetics, circumstance, even deliberate manipulation by others, our responses to these forces remain uniquely our own. Melissa Caldwell chose a path of careful adaptation and planned transformation. Nathan chose rage and destruction. That difference, more than the shocking circumstances that led to it, may be the most important lesson of this case. For those who continue to study the Caldwell case and its aftermath, the final chapter remains unwritten. Nathan Caldwell continues to serve his modified sentence, now participating in specialized therapy designed to address his unique trauma. The legal proceedings against Maxwell's associates continue, with each new testimony revealing additional layers of the experiment's scope and depravity. And Melissa's legacy lives on, in the adoption reforms sparked by her death, in the support, resources created for others facing similar identity crises, and in the profound questions her story raises about the nature of love, identity, and the human capacity for adaptation in the face of unimaginable truth. As Detective Marcus Rivera reflected in his final interview before retiring from the Ridgefield Police Department in October 2025, the Caldwell case changed how we think. About families, about identity, about the very foundations of who we are. It revealed how vulnerable we all are to manipulation. How easily our most intimate relationships can be influenced by forces we don't even perceive. But it also showed us the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. Melissa's capacity to absorb a devastating truth and find a way forward. The other twins, who discovered their true relationships and found healthy ways to redefine them. That's what I choose to take from this case after all these years, not just the tragedy, but the enduring human capacity to create meaning and find connection, even in the aftermath of the most profound deception. As 2026 began, 6 years after the shocking murder that exposed Dr. Gerald Maxwell's twisted experiment, the ripple effects of the Caldwell case continued to transform American society in unexpected ways. What had begun as a horrific tragedy in a Connecticut suburb had evolved into a catalyst for reform across multiple systems: adoption, scientific research, psychological treatment, and even criminal justice. In January 2026, the last of Maxwell's major associates was sentenced in federal court. Dr. Vivian Blackwood, who had served as Maxwell's primary research partner from 1975 until his death in 2001, received 15 years for her role in coordinating the network of observers who had manipulated Nathan and Melissa's relationship. Robert Simmons, the attorney who had arranged the fraudulent adoptions of multiple twin pairs, including the Brennan twins, received 12 years for fraud, conspiracy, and falsification of government documents. Today marks the final chapter in the prosecution of those responsible for one of the most disturbing violations of human autonomy in our nation's history. U.S. Attorney Gabriel Hernandez stated after the sentencing, While no prison term can undo the damage inflicted on the victims of Project Genesis, these sentences send a clear message that treating human beings as unwitting research subjects will be met with the full force of the law. For the 32 individuals identified as victims of Maxwell's twin separation experiment, the conclusion of the criminal cases offered a measure of closure, but left many questions unanswered. Chief among them, how had such an extensive research operation involving dozens of professionals across multiple states managed to operate in secret for over 3 decades? The answer emerged through a congressional investigation launched in 2025, which uncovered a disturbing network of institutional failures, deliberate cover-ups, and financial incentives that had allowed Maxwell's experiment to flourish unchecked. According to the investigation's final report, released in March 2026, Maxwell had leveraged his initial academic reputation to build relationships with hospital administrators, adoption agencies, and university officials who provided access to records, facilities, and subjects. As his research progressed beyond ethical boundaries in the 1970s, he transitioned from traditional academic funding to a shadow network of private investors fascinated by his early findings on genetic influence. Maxwell created what amounted to a private research fiefdom, explained Senator Michaela Rodriguez, who chaired the investigative committee. He operated outside institutional oversight, funded by wealthy individuals who valued results over ethics. When questions were raised about his methods, he used a combination of financial incentives and subtle blackmail to ensure silence. Those who participated in the early stages of his research found themselves compromised and unable to speak out as the project grew increasingly disturbing. The investigation identified 8 primary financial backers who had provided over $30 million to support Maxwell's research between 1975 and 2001. These individuals, predominantly from the technology and pharmaceutical sectors, had received regular updates on the twin studies, including detailed reports on Nathan and Melissa's relationship as it progressed from initial meeting to marriage. These were not naive investors, the congressional report stated. They were fully informed about the nature of Maxwell's research, including the deliberate separation of twins and the engineered romantic relationships. They continued providing financial support despite clear ethical violations because they believed the findings on genetic influence would eventually yield profitable applications in various industries. The revelation that wealthy individuals had essentially purchased front-row seats to observe the psychological trauma of Maxwell's subjects added yet another disturbing dimension to an already horrific case. It transformed the public's perception of the Caldwell tragedy from the actions of a single deranged researcher to a systemic failure of ethical oversight across multiple institutions. For Nathan Caldwell, now serving his modified sentence at a psychiatric facility rather than a maximum security prison, these revelations provided further validation of his long-held belief in a vast conspiracy. According to Dr. Monica Vega, the psychiatrist overseeing his treatment program, Nathan experienced a complex mix of vindication and deepened trauma upon learning the full scope of Maxwell's operation. There's a particular psychological injury that comes from discovering your paranoia was actually justified, Dr. Vega explained in a medical journal article published in April 2026. Nathan spent years believing he was being watched, manipulated, studied, and he was right. That validation doesn't heal the trauma. In some ways, it compounds it by confirming that the violation was even more extensive than he imagined. Nathan's ongoing treatment focused on helping him process this trauma while developing a stable sense of identity independent of the roles forced upon him by Maxwell's experiment. According to Dr. Vega, This process included establishing contact with other twin pairs who had been subjects in Maxwell's study, particularly those who had formed romantic relationships before discovering their biological connection. Peer support from others who've experienced similar identity disruption has been crucial, Dr. Vega noted. It provides validation that Nathan isn't alone in his experience, while also exposing him to different coping mechanisms and adaptation strategies. Seeing how others have managed to integrate this knowledge into their life narratives gives him models for his own healing journey. One such model came from Michael and Sarah Collins, the twins who had briefly dated in college before drifting apart and later discovering their biological relationship. By 2026, they had established a nationwide support network for individuals affected by inadvertent genetic sexual attraction. Not just Maxwell's victims, but anyone who had formed romantic attachments with unknown relatives. What happened to us was manufactured by Maxwell, but similar situations occur naturally through adoption, sperm donation, and other circumstances that separate biological relatives. Michael explained during a therapy session that Nathan attended remotely from his facility. The shame, the identity crisis, the need to redefine relationships, these are universal challenges for anyone in this situation. Nathan's case may be the most extreme, but the psychological processes are similar. For Nathan, whose response to the truth had culminated in violence, the opportunity to connect with others who had chosen different paths provided both perspective and regret. In a remarkable development, Nathan began corresponding with Jennifer and Amanda Woods, the Portland twins who had established the Separated Siblings Foundation. Despite their initial hesitation to engage with the man responsible for Melissa's death, they recognized the potential value in understanding his perspective. "We didn't approach Nathan to excuse what he did," Jennifer explained in a 2026 interview. "We approached him because understanding the path that led to his violent response helps us develop better intervention strategies for others experiencing similar crises." Every twin pair separated by Maxwell's experiment, every sibling who unknowingly forms a romantic relationship, faces a moment of devastating revelation. Our goal is to ensure that moment leads to healing rather than destruction. Through these connections, Nathan began the painful process of acknowledging that while the circumstances that led to his crime were extraordinarily traumatic, his response had not been inevitable. The existence of others who had faced the same revelation but chosen non-violent paths forced him to confront his own agency in Melissa's death. In May 2026, Nathan wrote a public letter that was published in several major newspapers and shared widely online. Unlike his previous statements, which had focused on justifying his actions as a form of mercy, this letter acknowledged Melissa's autonomy and the alternatives he had failed to consider. "I've spent years directing my rage outward, at Maxwell, at his associates, at the system that allowed our lives to be manipulated. That rage was justified, but it blinded me to a crucial truth. Melissa deserved the chance to determine her own response to our situation. She was finding a path forward, creating a strategy for us to transition from husband and wife to brother and sister. I couldn't see that path because I was consumed by shame and anger. I believed I was protecting her, but in reality, I was denying her the autonomy that had already been stolen from us throughout our lives. That is my deepest regret." The letter marked a significant evolution in Nathan's perspective and was widely interpreted as the first genuine expression of remorse for his actions rather than merely the circumstances that led to them. For Patricia Thompson, Melissa's mother, it offered a complex mix of emotions. "Nothing will bring my daughter back," Thompson said when asked about Nathan's letter. "Nothing will give her the chance to live the life she was carefully planning. But there's some comfort in knowing that the person responsible for taking that chance from her finally recognizes what he took. It doesn't change what happened, but it acknowledges Melissa's agency in a way previous statements haven't. For the broader community of Maxwell's victims, Nathan's evolution became part of an ongoing conversation about agency, responsibility, and healing in the aftermath of manipulation. While his crime remained inexcusable, his journey toward acknowledging Melissa's autonomy provided a framework for others struggling with the knowledge that their most intimate relationships had been engineered by others. The key question many of us face is how much of our lives was real and how much was manufactured, explained Andrea Sullivan, who had unwittingly worked alongside her twin brother Mark for years before discovering their relationship. When you learn that people you trusted were paid to influence your decisions, it's natural to question everything. Nathan's case reminds us that even within manipulation, we retain the capacity for choice and the responsibility for the choices we make. This theme of distinguishing between victimization and responsibility became central to the therapeutic approaches developed specifically for Maxwell's subjects and others facing similar identity disruptions. Dr. Lauren Fitzpatrick, who had testified at Nathan's trial and later specialized in treating identity trauma, pioneered an approach she called narrative reclamation, helping individuals separate the elements of their lives that had been manipulated from those that remained authentically their own. The goal isn't to deny the manipulation or its impact, Dr. Fitzpatrick explained in a 2026 presentation on her work. It's to identify the spaces where authentic choice remained possible despite that manipulation. For Nathan and Melissa, their career choices, their daily interactions, their personal values, these remained largely their own, even while their relationship was being influenced. Recognizing these areas of autonomy helps rebuild a sense of agency that trauma often destroys. For survivors like Jennifer and Amanda Woods, this approach provided a crucial framework for processing their experience without being defined by it. Maxwell controlled a significant part of our lives without our knowledge, Amanda noted in a Foundation publication. But he didn't control everything. I chose my career, my friends, my values independently. Recognizing that distinction has been essential to my healing. The public's fascination with the Caldwell case and Maxwell's experiment continued to evolve as well. What had begun as sensationalist coverage focused on the shocking revelation of siblings married for 25 years had gradually transformed into more nuanced exploration of the ethical, psychological, and social implications of the case. By mid-2026, the conversation had expanded beyond the specifics of Maxwell's experiment to address broader questions about genetic identity, the right to biological truth, and the ethics of various reproductive technologies that create similar possibilities for unknown genetic relationships. The Caldwell case forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about how we balance genetic truth with psychological well-being, noted bioethicist Dr. Eleanor Whitman in a June 2026 TED Talk that went viral. If knowing your biological identity can cause profound trauma, but not knowing creates the risk of inadvertent incest, how do we navigate that tension? These aren't abstract philosophical questions anymore. They're practical challenges our society must address. These challenges were being confronted through various legislative and policy initiatives inspired by the Caldwell case. By July 2026, 23 states had implemented some version of the Genetic Identity Right Act, which guaranteed individuals access to their biological origins upon reaching adulthood. The federal Brennan Twins Protection Act had been expanded to include provisions for a voluntary DNA registry designed to prevent romantic relationships between unknown relatives. Meanwhile, the psychological impact of the Caldwell case continued to reverberate through those who had been closest to Nathan and Melissa. Rebecca Lawson, who had received Melissa's final text message seeking help, established the Melissa Caldwell Foundation, which provided emergency mental health services for individuals in crisis, particularly those experiencing acute identity disruption. Melissa reached out for help in those final hours, but there was no system in place to respond quickly to that kind of crisis, Lawson explained at the Foundation's launch in August 2026. Our goal is to create that system, to ensure that when someone is experiencing the kind of psychological emergency that Nathan was going through, there's immediate support available, not just a traditional therapy appointment weeks later, but crisis intervention designed specifically for identity-threatening situations. The Foundation's work highlighted another legacy of the Caldwell case: the recognition of identity disruption as a specific form of psychological trauma requiring specialized intervention. While previously grouped under broader categories of crisis response, mental health systems across the country began developing protocols specifically for situations where an individual's fundamental sense of self was suddenly destabilized. We now recognize that learning information that radically alters your understanding of who you are constitutes a unique form of trauma, explained Dr. Samuel Levine, the psychiatrist whom Melissa had tried to get Nathan to see before her death. Whether it's discovering you're adopted, learning about unknown siblings, or uncovering family secrets like those in the Caldwell case, these revelations can trigger a distinctive crisis that traditional emergency mental health services weren't designed to address. As 2026 drew to a close, the physical locations associated with the Caldwell tragedy had been transformed as well. The Ridgefield house where Melissa died had been purchased by a non-profit organization and converted into a retreat center for families affected by adoption fraud and identity disruption. Maxwell's former research facility in upstate New York had been demolished, with plans to create a memorial garden dedicated to the victims of unethical human experimentation. For Patricia Thompson, these physical transformations paralleled her own internal journey from grief to advocacy. There were years when I could only see what had been lost: my beautiful daughter, the future she would never have, the grandchildren who would never be born, Thompson reflected in a December 2026 interview. Now I also see what's been created from this tragedy: new protections, new support systems, new understanding of the complex interplay between genetic truth and human psychology. It doesn't balance the scales, nothing could, but it means Melissa's death wasn't entirely in vain. Nathan Caldwell, continuing his treatment and serving his modified sentence, would never regain his freedom. Yet through his correspondence with other Maxwell victims, his public acknowledgement of Melissa's autonomy, and his willingness to share his experience to prevent similar tragedies, he had begun the process of reclaiming some measure of meaning from the devastation of his life. "I will always be defined by the worst thing I've ever done," Nathan wrote in a letter to Jennifer Woods in November 2026. "But perhaps I can also be defined in some small way by what I do with the understanding I've gained since then. If my experience helps even one person choose a different path when faced with similar trauma, then perhaps some fragment of good can come from this tragedy." For the researchers, ethicists, and mental health professionals who continue to study the Caldwell case, this evolution in Nathan's perspective represents a crucial counterpoint to the deterministic view that trauma inevitably leads to specific outcomes. As Dr. Rachel Abrams noted in the conclusion to her updated book on the case, the Caldwell tragedy reminds us that while our identities are profoundly shaped by genetics, experiences, and even deliberate manipulation, our responses to identity disruption remain uniquely our own. Melissa chose adaptation and transformation. Nathan initially chose destruction, but has since moved toward acknowledgement and limited reparation. Other Maxwell victims have found their own distinctive paths. This diversity of response affirms that even in the face of extraordinary trauma, human beings retain the capacity for choice, a reality that offers both responsibility and hope. As society continues to grapple with the implications of the Caldwell case and Maxwell's experiment, this recognition of human agency within trauma may be its most enduring legacy. Beyond the sensationalist headlines, beyond the scientific, ethical failures, beyond even the personal tragedy of two siblings whose lives were manipulated from birth, the case ultimately illuminates the delicate balance between victimization and responsibility that defines the human experience. For those who continue to study, discuss, and learn from the Caldwell tragedy, this balance offers no easy answers, but essential questions. How do we honor the trauma of those whose identities have been disrupted while still affirming their capacity for choice? How do we build systems that both prevent such manipulation and respond effectively when it occurs? How do we balance the right to genetic truth with the psychological well-being of those whose identities are built on incomplete information? These questions extend far beyond the specifics of the Caldwell case or Maxwell's experiment. They touch on fundamental aspects of human identity in an era when genetic testing, reproductive technology, and social media continually reshape our understanding of family, relationship, and self. In this sense, the legacy of Nathan and Melissa Caldwell transcends the particulars of their tragedy to highlight universal truths about identity formation, autonomy, and the human capacity for both destruction and healing in the face of devastating truth. Their story, with all its horror and complexity, has become a lens through which society examines its most basic assumptions about who we are and how we become ourselves. The Caldwell case defies simple narratives, wrote journalist Maya Saperstein in the conclusion to the final edition of her book on Maxwell's experiment. It is simultaneously a story about the worst kind of scientific abuse and the remarkable resilience of its survivors. It reveals both the fragility of human identity when faced with devastating truth and the possibility of reconstructing meaning even from the most profound disruption. It reminds us that while much of who we are may be determined by forces beyond our control, genetics, upbringing, even deliberate manipulation, what we do with that knowledge remains our choice. Perhaps that, ultimately, is the most important lesson of this tragic case, that even in the aftermath of unimaginable violation, the human capacity for choice, for meaning-making, for transformation remains. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.